Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of No Shame, No Blame, a podcast where we talk about emotional healing, growth, and breaking generational cycles. I'm your host, Brandi, and with me, as always, is my co-host and longtime friend, Miguel.
How's everybody doing today?
Yeah, how is everyone doing? How are you doing?
You know, I'm doing well. I just got done having my birthday and
How old did you turn?
38,
You're officially midlife.
officially midlife.
For our listeners, in case you guys thought 50 was midlife, like I did when I was 10, that's not true. It's 38. We're only living to, what is it, 75 and a half?
75 and a half, 76. I had a client that said he was going to live to 84. So we'll see.
Wow, he's like calling it and manifesting that for
Yep.
himself. I'm happy for him. Hopefully he makes it.
Hopefully.
Well, congratulations on midlife. Did you do anything fun?
No, I didn't. I actually have a planned trip coming up to the Virgin Islands. Going to St. Martin next Friday. So I'll be there for a week. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm excited about.
Ooh, before the summer, gonna get your tan on?
Hopefully. We'll see. What about you? How's everything been going, B?
Oh, it's been busy, but that's my life on a regular basis. If anybody knows me, they know that I don't know how to slow down. It's a gift and a curse. Just lying, it's a trauma response.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seriously.
But yeah, so I've been busy. Obviously, this podcast has been a lot more work than I initially anticipated, but nothing that isn't stuff I enjoy. So I guess I can't complain to be busy with stuff that I like. But everything else, is kind of just steadily moving along, kind of already planning Ariana's birthday. We're having two big birthdays this year. Ariana's turning 13
Oh, wow.
and then Mia will be 10. So
Time flies, huh?
so I got my baby coming into double digits and my oldest jumping into teen years. So as crazy as it sounds, we're already thinking about both of those birthdays. So, other than that, just normal mom life.
Normal mom's life. That's, I mean, yeah, parenting, right?
I was just going to say
Parenting.
parenting life.
So, yeah, I mean, let's get into this. This is going to be a very heavy topic today.
I'm so excited.
Right.
You want to get us started on it?
Yeah, well, on this episode, we're going to be talking about a key topic in this podcast that's generational trauma. If you haven't heard that phrase before, it means the passing down of physiological and emotional abuse through generations. It's also sometimes called intergenerational trauma or historical trauma. Now, when we have generational healing to do, it's not a one size fits all situation and it's not a linear process. Some steps include acknowledging and processing the trauma, establishing new patterns, working towards secure attachments, and developing empathy. All right, so it's a tough pill to swallow because what is generational trauma? There could be a lot of different types. So it took me a long time to really get to an understanding of what that is. But for me, um, it was not spending enough time with my parents as I was growing up. So to everyone, what is your individual, generational trauma? And I think that's something that we all have to really sit down and think through. Because it's a heavy topic, and it's something that we just have to definitely get to know about ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And that fun that you're talking about that is I used to think that generational trauma was just about passing things down like addiction. And I thought it only could be passed down from one generation to another, like specifically just mom and dad to me and my siblings, right? And I only ever heard about it as far as talking about family. But as I've gone through my journey of my healing process, like I've learned and realized that I was only really looking at generational trauma through the lens of familial trauma.
Mm,
So, like you mentioned, there are umbrellas to trauma. There's like oppression and war and discrimination, displacement, a number of things that can cause generational trauma that can be passed down. And so, again, like I mentioned, I had only assumed that it comes down from one generation.
yep.
So my dad being an alcoholic, I'm like, okay, more likely than not, I'll be an alcoholic. And if I'm not, then my kids won't be alcoholics. I kind of just thought it was just like one
And it's
generation.
yeah.
Yeah. So I actually found this article when I was researching for this episode, and they talk about generational trauma and how it's actually altering our DNA, which was something I didn't know about. So they say that science is proving that it can alter our DNA by passing down traumas from the mother to the children But because it alters DNA, it's multiple generations that this affects,
Sure.
right? And that was fascinating. Like multiple generations, you're still having impacts or feeling impacts physically in your body from things that happened 3 or 4 generations ago. And that's, first of all, fascinating, but also kind of sad and scary. So as an example, the article talks about like mothers who survived the Holocaust, and that extreme trauma. So the women who survived that and then went on later to have children, they tested the women and noticed that they had a change in a DNA segment that was responsible for stress responses.
Mm,
And when they went on to have children, their kids also had that exact same change to that DNA segment, even though they never experienced the direct trauma that their mothers did.
for sure.
So that was their indication that, these are being passed down. So I'm going to just take this exactly from the article because they wrote it really well and explained it in a way that makes sense. So they say epigenetic markers are chemical tags that can attach to DNA and switch genes on or off, which will obviously influence inherited traits or diseases. So another example that they talk about in the article is women who experienced various levels of abuse in their childhood. When they ended up having children, they noticed that the women who had experienced more severe child abuse, their children ended up having higher depression and chronic depression compared to women who experienced less child abuse. I love the article. I'm going to stop talking about it because I can go all day about how fascinating these genetic changes are. If you guys are interested in reading about it, I'll make sure that I link the article below in the show notes.
As I was sitting there listening to you, I was thinking through what is trauma? Is an impact of something. It's an event that has caused damage to you in a specific way, whether it's physical trauma, emotional trauma. It's essentially a shock to your body.
Mm,
So as a shock to your body, right? What happens is, like you said, all of these changes start to happen. And so it makes sense as to why, someone who was involved in a traumatic experience would pass these on to their future generations. Because to your point, right, it's going to rewrite their DNA.
yeah. So it's like, it's crazy because it makes me think about like alcoholism. We've talked about is like a big trauma in my family. And so genetically, like literally, that means like it could be predisposed or not. And that's even more fascinating because I always thought my whole life I have 5 siblings. So I was like, all 5 of us are going to be alcoholics or have the potential to be alcoholics.
For sure.
And I mean, that's true. But like genetically, if we really were able to do testing and could afford that kind of stuff, we would be able to find out exactly which ones of us actually do have that predisposition. I feel like I can kind of already see who does and doesn't because even though I, partake in drinking, I don't fully abstain, even though I know that I have the addiction that runs through my genetics. But I also have never been somebody who's really grabbed by alcohol in a sense that I didn't recognize when, like, it was grabbing a hold of me. I did choose to go sober when I was in my early 20s, right before I had my oldest daughter, because I was being a mean drunk. I
Mm,
noticed, like, when we would go out, it wasn't fun anymore. Going out and
mhm.
partying I wasn't having a good time and laughing. We'd come home and it would be fights.
Yeah.
So the nights never ended as fun as they started, and
Right.
the next day sure as hell wasn't fun trying to, like, remember what I said, what I did, and then go back around and make my apologies. So I decided to go sober at that time because I was like, "Ooh, this kind of feels like my family. I feel like I'm acting like my grandma a little bit." And so I made that choice for myself. But again, I mean, I can't say maybe I do have it. We don't know genetically, but it's fascinating to realize um that some of these things are not our fault.
Yeah, they're not our fault, because, like you've been saying, right, it's not necessarily something that we came into. The thing about this, right? The whole reason why we're doing this podcast is breaking generational traumas. Every single one of them. We all have the capability to break those. And from what I can tell, and I've known you for a long time, right,
Mhm.
is you've been able to break that, and that's admirable. Not a lot of people can, you know. Um, they sit there and they hold these traumas and they want to use it as an excuse. And I don't think that that's something that people should do, right? Yes, you have this trauma, but what can you as an individual do to break it? Everyone has a choice to be able to say, I'm going to continue down this path or I'm going to move past it.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think you're right. That's really what it takes, right? Is getting, I don't know, people call it the third eye, quote
Hmm.
unquote, right? Getting this perspective of yourself where you can critically analyze your behaviors, but not judge yourself for them, right? You're not looking at them and saying you're a bad person, you're right, you're wrong. You're just saying, huh, you're observing. I did that. And why did I do that? And what does that mean about me? And
Absolutely.
am I happy with that?
Absolutely.
And then making that effort. So if it's not our fault, are there things we can do to minimize, how we feel or how we're dealing with them?
There are, it's all about being able to, like you said, having that third eye, having that self-discipline to be introspective, right? And say, holy cow, this is what I'm doing. What can I do now to change this? And, you know, you can get some help, right?
Yeah.
You can talk to people about it. I feel like a lot of people, a lot of the times what we want to do is we want to hold everything in.
Mm,
And that's not a healthy thing to do. That weighs you down so much. So, being able to, one, like you said, acknowledge that you have something that's going on and that you're not a bad person, right? Because you're not. You just happen to have this situation that's happening. But having the conversations with, some professionals that can help you out to be able to break these things, to recognize the patterns that you're kind of getting into is also key. But it all starts with recognizing that you have this trauma going on.
or some kind of work to do.
That
Yeah.
that you need that exactly, that you need to work on
Like,
something.
what is it like? The first step is acknowledging you have a problem, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's
there's a
correct.
reason that's the first step, guys. That's for everything, every situation.
Everything.
And this is the thing. I think sometimes it's hard and embarrassing when you first do kind of start having the self realizations about yourself. And it's hard not to judge yourself, firstly. But then it's also like you think about what are people on the outside going to think about me now?
For
Because
sure.
you yourself are already looking at yourself in a negative light because of this particular trauma, or behavior because of the trauma, that you're like, wow, people are really going to feel, look at me in this way or that way because of my experience.
Judgment.
Exactly. And that's what we're all afraid of. And so I think that it's also important to say that therapy doesn't always have to be the first stop,
Mm-mm.
right? Like, and maybe that's a place that you need to work up to. And it can start like the internet. We have technology at our fingertips. Like, there's infinite amount of resources. And I know TikTok is going away and whatever, but I've learned so much about myself and just mental health in general from that app as well. So it's just like there's a lot of other areas and social medias, and obviously make sure that the sources are very distinguished and
Yeah.
accurate sources. I can say firsthand after having cancer, you know how many people sent me like things from, I don't know.
WebMD.
Yeah, WebMD, Wikipedia of like how heal myself,
Yeah,
um, and telling me to do those things instead. So yeah, like, but either way, you can use them for positive things,
absolutely.
to learn other coping strategies that you can do for yourself.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? And I think we touched base on this on our previous episode is you do have to be careful with what's on the internet because not everything is true, right? You can't believe everything that's on the internet. And so you do have to be careful. But absolutely, technology these days is so high. I mean, I was just watching a commercial the other day about Gemini.
Mm,
Gemini is Android. I think it's Google's artificial intelligence platform. And
not sponsored, by the way.
no, not sponsored. And I think I caught on to this. One of the guys on there on the commercial was like, I just want to have a conversation. You know what I mean? And it's kind of scary to think that we have that type of technology with AI, but AI is meant to learn as it goes. You can train it. Again, you have to be really careful
Right.
because not everything is going to be, really good with that. But yeah, the technology that
Oh,
we have so much nowadays
but it's
is
like, sorry, that kind of gave me this like, that gave me the ick.
it's a little scary.
It gave me the ick because, first of all, like, that's crazy, right? Yeah, but you're talking about in the advancement of technology. We're going to have a whole topic on technology.
Yeah.
But second, the fact that somebody's more willing to open up and I would just want to have a conversation with a bot, an AI versus another human.
But why do you think that is? We just touched on that. It's because you're going to be judged by another human, whereas the AI, it doesn't have any
Oh,
feelings. And that's to your point. It is scary. And that's where we as individuals, as human beings have to do better. right?
Yes.
How many unalivings have we, heard about over the last couple of years because of that factor, right? People want to talk to you about something and you don't listen, or you want to talk about something that you have going on and they judge you, or you have all these cries for help.
Or they tell you and then you use it later when an argument against
Yes.
them and, well, go and do whatever you feel like doing, and then it leads to the worst.
Yeah. So I get where you're coming from, and I think that's, as scary as it sounds, probably why some people are turning to technology, is because there's no judgment. When you write something on social media, unless you have your picture up and no one really knows you, you're just another, you're a number,
You
you're a
could
number.
just make a random account and be a random person.
Exactly.
That's
And there's no
scary.
judgment there.
And you're right. You're right. To your point, we do need to be better, like we talked about in our vulnerability episode, with not only allowing spaces like that, but also ourselves sharing when we feel that we have that space created by someone else, to kind of start bridging that. And yeah, so using technology positively, God, that quick a really
Ha-
that
Took a
took a
dark
quick
turn.
detour.
Yeah.
But use it for good. Hopefully you don't need to talk to a AI bot for a conversation, but it's a possibility and it could be a source of help if you needed it. And so yeah, like it's funny that you're talking about that, because I think it really just starts with being mindful first and
Mhm.
foremost. And like we've just touched on a couple different times, like really that introspection. So I have like this example. I remember when a few years ago I was kind of in between, going to school for my associates and my bachelor's. I had just finished on my 2-year degree. And the girls were really young. And at this time, I was like going to this workout class, and my car was in the shop. And so my partner at the time was taking me to the class. And I was like, the girls needed to get their bath for the night. And I was like, oh, I forgot to lay the girls' clothes out, so can you do that? And he's like, yeah, no problem. He drops me off. He comes back to pick me up. And I'm like, did you bathe the girls? And he's like, no. And right away, I just get hot. Again, at this point, I'm still not healed. I'm not healthy. I'm not understanding my triggers just yet. So I'm instantly triggered, and I want to react. And I'll tell you what my instinct told me to say.
I can imagine.
Maybe,
I
I
already
maybe I won't
know.
tell you exactly, because we both know how I could come off,
Yeah.
but I was pissed, right? And I'm like, in my mind, I'm just like, "Hey, why are they not bathed? It's their bedtime. This is late. This is the routine." Like, I'm just in my mind thinking, like, why do I have to do all this work on my own? Why is this always my responsibility? I can't even just go out and work out and come home and shower. I got to take care of the babies when I get back by myself. I'm thinking all these things.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere, my therapist that I was seeing at school, her voice comes into my head and she tells me to just breathe, pause and breathe. So before I even let those thoughts come out of my mouth, I take a moment and I really analyze, like, okay, why am I mad? What about what he just said made me mad? Specifically, because I was like, why did I just get so upset by those few words? Um, and you know what? It was what I kind of uncovered. It had nothing to do with any of those things I just said about what I was thinking. It was communication.
Mhm.
I did not tell my partner that I expected him to bathe our daughters. I had only specifically mentioned laying out their clothes so they could get a bath.
Mm.
Okay.
Mhm.
I failed to communicate clearly what I needed,
Mhm.
what I wanted, and what I expected. Now, my partner, he also failed in that communication as well, because there was a window where he could have said anything else. Is that it? So lay out their clothes. That's all I have to do, right? Maybe not bathe. He could have said, do I need to bathe them? Not bathe them, right? So there
Are
was,
you gonna do it?
yes. So there was all these other, there was these other moments and small places where he maybe could have also said something different.
Right.
And if either one of us had just taken that extra little time to get out of our heads, stop thinking that he can hear everything I'm thinking and that I can hear everything he was thinking, if we would have just said everything right then and there and made it very clear and concise, we would not have been in that situation. I would not have been angry and I wouldn't be sitting in that position. So again, all of these thought processes happened in like, 2.5 seconds. But as I realized this, I was like, okay, what is reacting the way that I initially wanted to react? What is that going to do for me?
Mm,
It wasn't going to do shit.
mm,
It wasn't going to get the babies cleaned any
nope.
faster. It was only going to make the night worse. It was going to stress me out. It was going to stress him out. It was going to turn into something bigger because then again, I was coming from a place of I'm doing everything by myself. So that's where I would have come from in that argument. And that's what I would have said. And trust me, fellas, if you guys know, women would have brought up examples. I would have pulled up every example I had when I felt like I was doing something by myself and thrown that in his face. And we would have had this huge blowout argument over all of these other moments in the past that really, truly had nothing to do with what was happening in front of me.
Yeah.
So I was like, bite my tongue. And it was not easy to do this. Let me tell you, the discomfort we talked about that I felt I discovered vulnerability, that was intense. Let me tell you, the feeling in my chest was uncomfortable
Mm,
AF. Like somebody was sitting on me. I felt like I couldn't
mm,
breathe, but I had to just like power through the discomfort of that and be like, okay, it's not a problem. Let's just get them home and we're just going to have to like tag team real quick and like rush through the bath process because they should be in bed. Like, let's just get home and get it done fast. It's fine.
yeah.
And I think he can sense I was frustrated, right? That's not to say there was no emotion involved and that I didn't express emotion, but I didn't let my emotion control me.
Mm,
You see, I didn't let that situation and all of these feelings that I was having, I didn't let that dictate how I approached that conversation and what I said. And like I said, that doesn't mean that there wasn't an attitude. That doesn't mean that there wasn't probably a tone to my voice. But wouldn't that be so much easier for him to deal with as my partner versus me coming at him and saying everything he's ever done wrong to make me feel like I was, a single parent in that moment?
yeah.
And so I think like even just stuff like that, recognizing how I have my own traumas that cause that kind of reaction.
Yeah.
But again, the introspection of understanding, healing, I'm like, he also has his own traumas. And what does me yelling at him do to him? Right? If he hasn't communicated that, I don't know, but that's something to think about. Other people are dealing with their own traumas as well. And even though you're learning to control yours, you have to also stop to think about how you handling and your reaction to yours, how that could also be triggering other people's.
Definitely. And I was just about to say, how many people actually know that? How many people actually in relationships know that other people are dealing with traumas and have that introspection and that, emotional intelligence to actually be able to understand that?
And that's interesting you say that. Don't we all say everybody comes with baggage?
Everybody comes with
So
baggage.
don't we know that you come with trauma?
Well, to a degree, yes, but we don't know specifically what kind of traumas. And I think a lot of the reason why is well, from my perspective, right, as a Hispanic male, and I touched this on the episode before. We don't talk about that. You know what I mean? We don't talk about our traumas. We,
Mm,
as I mentioned, right, we are raised to not show any emotion because we're the providers, we're the protectors. If we show any vulnerability, we're weak.
you're
And
expected
so
to be strong and
we
carry the
are.
weight on your shoulders and not complain about it.
And I actually, and you liked the post that I shared, right? And I can't remember what it is. So we'll have to maybe tag that link somewhere. Um, but it does speak towards that, right? Is we need to do a better job just in general to be able to discuss what traumas we have to be able to make things work, right? Regardless of what they are. Um, because to your point, right? There's a thing of lack of communication. There's a failure in lack of communication. And a lot of the times, over the course of this past year and a half, I've done a lot of reading that speaks about that is we're not mind readers. No one is. You can't tell me what I'm thinking and
Mhm.
expect that you're going to do the same thing and vice versa. So how do we bridge that?
Yeah, that's vulnerability. I mean, again, practice, practice, practice. Vulnerability is always it's going to come back to that every time. And again, these are topics are all interlinked. So Again, it might sound repetitious, but it's not practiced enough.
Hmm.
It's just not. And I think that's the other thing too is like traumas are complex. You explained what a trauma is, but when we think about our own family, sometimes people block out things. They're like, we're desensitized to trauma. That's the best way to talk
Yeah.
about it. And let me use an example here. Another one of my familial traumas is physical abuse.
Hmm.
Okay. Domestic violence in my family lineage on both sides,
Hmm.
very strong. As an example of this, one of my relatives had mentioned when they were young, seeing their grandfather chase their grandmother around the table. So they were like thinking, like, oh, they're playing
Hmm.
tag. So, this 4 year old jumps in and like is running around giggling and doesn't understand the emotional context of what's happening in the moment,
Yeah.
And so, but I mean, that's how young people in my family have witnessed abuse,
Wow.
even younger, probably. So, that same relative I'm telling you went on to herself be involved in multiple domestic violence relationships.
Mm.
So, like, the point that this particular family member, like, would not only be in the domestic violence situations, but talk about them like they were in a boxing match. Like, oh, yeah, I got in a fight with so and so, and oh, but I hit them and I did this back. And literally, just like it was no big deal that they were getting physically abused by their partner and that they were actively fighting back. It was like a badge of honor. It was shocking, but again, it's not surprising. That's what I mean when I say desensitized.
Mhm.
She doesn't even understand that it is traumatic. My kids would hear that story and be like shook. They would be like, people do that? People hit each other like that? Adult relationships and can be like that? Because my kids have no experience or history of any types of physical trauma and violence in their life. But again, that particular family member of mine, they grew up with it.
Mhm.
It's normal. This is just what life is.
Mhm.
And so that's what we talk about when we're talking about these traumas. It's making sure you're not desensitizing yourself. It's saying, I'm not okay
Yeah.
with this. Oh, I experienced this growing up. My kids will be fine experiencing this growing up. Or my parents grew up like that and look at, they turned out all right. Like, do we just want to always be all right?
Mhm.
And again, if we're honest with ourselves and have that introspection, are we really all right? Probably
No.
not. Therefore, neither will anybody else
Yeah.
around us.
Because we're just keep running that cycle, and it's going to be never ending, right? And then we don't want that for sure. And I love my parents to death. They did what they could with the resources that they had available at the time. I've taken some things that they did really well. I try to discard as best as I possibly could some of the things that I was like, that wasn't something that I was really cool with. Um, the biggest piece with that, and before I get into that, I mean, holy cow, that's intense. Like that's a lot of stuff. But you know, for me growing up, thinking through this episode this morning, just to kind of narrow it down for a little bit more specific generational trauma. I didn't get to spend a lot of time,
Mhm.
and
I mean, that's the role, right? To provide.
that's the role. Like I said, we're meant to provide. We're meant to not be emotional. If something's wrong, we just kind of sit there and we compartmentalize it, and that's it.
So in terms of Mexican culture, your dad is like the epitome of
He
what a perfect dad would
he
be.
is the epitome of what a perfect dad should be, right?
Okay.
In Mexican culture. But obviously we know better as we've grown up, right? We understand that quality time with our children, with our family, with our significant other is also important, because if you start to get away from that, you're just going to start creating this cycle, and it just shifts to another generation. So, I recall one of the most sensitive times that I went through with my dad is when I used to work at another financial institution. I'd work Monday through Friday. On the weekends, I would help my dad because he does construction, he does remodeling and stuff like that. And one day I go, you know what, Dad? I don't even do this for the extra money. It's good. Don't get me wrong, but I do it because I'm spending time with you.
Wow.
I was like, this is and I feel like I'm gonna break down now because it's just how emotional I was at the time. But I was like, I don't know how long I'm gonna be around. I don't know how long you're gonna be around. But just the simple fact that I get to see you every Saturday and every Sunday, and I get to spend just alone time with you, this is way more valuable to me than the extra money that I'm making with you.
It was like the little boy in you finally getting what he wanted.
Yes. And, you know, he played a lot of baseball. He played a lot of sports. Baseball was his thing every Sunday. So I go to practice with him a lot of the time, but it wasn't the same. I was there and he was practicing baseball and he would sometimes involve me in it as I got older, but it was just always, okay, yeah, here, I'm going to do this. Go do your own thing. And I was like, well, okay.
Oh, it's like, "You're in the vicinity of me, so we're still spending time together at
Yeah.
the park, even though we're not playing catch together."
And we weren't
Kind
playing
of,
catch
yeah.
together, and it would happen sometimes, but it was always then I'm gonna go back to the rest of the fellas. Um, so what I've made it a goal of mine, and I'm not perfect. No one is.
I was gonna say that, and this is not to say that your dad wasn't a great dad, it's just this
Phenomenal father.
again, this is just the introspection of being able to critically
Yep.
analyze and to view other people outside of you and say like, "Hey, there's some things you could have been a little bit better at."
For sure.
And I'm not saying that because I don't like you or I wanna make you feel bad. I'm merely speaking from experience. I would have liked this a little more.
And I feel like a lot of times it's really hard for you to approach your parents and say that. But I've had a conversation with both my parents about that, and that takes a lot of guts because
On both of your parts,
yeah.
because parents usually get very defensive.
Oh, for sure. And it's okay, but going back to what I was gonna say, I haven't been perfect with this, but a lot of people don't know me. Those that do know me know that I'm a gamer. I've been a gamer for a very long time. That's something that I do to relieve some of the stress, right? To have some of my own time because I personally, I mean, I guess you can say it was a bad habit, but I learned early on that going out, staying out late and drinking with your buddies wasn't something that was going to be fruitful moving forward. And it wasn't safe, you're a testament to this on how crazy we would get with some of those house parties, after being out for a couple of hours. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I
Yeah.
was like, how did I make it to this house? But so my oldest, he has also taken up on gaming. And so my other kids have too. So I try to incorporate him with that, right? Like I've tried to piece that with him. And as of right now, that's what he's into. And as he gets older, I know he's gonna get, more into different things. But I I've made it a goal of mine to try to be involved with everything they can. I mean, shoot, my daughter, right? And not that she does it nowadays, because I don't know, maybe she's growing out of it, maybe she's not, but I would always let her paint my nails,
Mm-mm.
right? It's not something that I enjoy, but for my princess, if she wants to have that done, you know what? I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna have my nails done.
That's the only time you have, like, she can have just her time with just
Yep.
you and have your
Yep.
attention, and that's yeah, so
It's
you're trying to implement and give your kids that time you
that I
weren't able
never
to
got.
have.
Yeah, exactly. And as my other two get older, I got to figure out what they like to do. But I, like I said, it's just one of those things where for me, and it's interesting, I'm going to jump into this and we'll talk about this in another episode. But I actually just got done listening to the 5 love languages, and my love language that's primarily heavy. And I'd have to look into this because it wants me to pay for something and stuff like that, which also, by the way, not sponsored. Um, but it's quality time.
Mm,
People have always asked me for my birthday, for Christmas, different events, what do you want for your birthday? What do you want as a gift? I've always told them nothing.
because you just want quality
I just
time.
want quality time. And that quality time stems from not having that quality time with my parents.
That's interesting too, because when we get together, obviously with kids, sometimes we've had a lot of time pass between reconnecting and like we would go months without seeing each other. And then when our families would get together, we would all like, hey, come over for a party. And we'd be at the park having a party. And then we'd all come back to your place and we'd sit here till 2 or 3, 4 in the morning, just having conversation
Yep.
because it had been so long since we had quality time with
Yep.
each other. And we all were such good friends that we're like, man, we just enjoyed each other's company. We just didn't get it enough.
Yep.
And so that's interesting. Like, of course, it makes sense. It's like, but you know what? I also heard about love language. Your love language is what you didn't get as a kid.
Uh-huh.
And so fascinating that you're saying that because, yeah, that literally is what you've been talking about. Like, you're like, I didn't get this from my dad. This meant so much.
I made that realization, honestly, the first go round I read the book. As soon as they said what the love languages were, I was like, "Holy cow, that is me." And to your point, it's because that's what you were missing as a child. Like your inner child comes out. And, you know, going back to what you were speaking about, right? What is the whole purpose for the argument that I'm potentially going to have? It's not that two adults are fighting each other. It's that two children within themselves are fighting each other.
Oh, ow. I wasn't ready for that one. The 2 kids inside of you are fighting.
They're
That's
fighting each other.
we just talked last week about our kids and how quick they can forgive, but our little kids and us, we hold them grudges, and you're right.
But
That's just like the tantrum in me.
yeah, and it's not because the child inside us wants to hold on to that. It's because the adult version of us is jaded, and we want to hold on to that because we want to be right. We want to be the dominant person in this argument. We want to win, and it's not about winning
Winning
or
or
losing,
losing.
right? Because it's not you versus me. It's us versus whatever the issue is. And sadly, it's our inner children versus what the issue is.
Yeah, it's our traumas in that
Yes.
inner child.
Yes.
I love that. That was great, beautiful to say that. I didn't expect that. That just hit me in the feels. That's true. Man, I gotta put my little girl in timeout. She's
Yeah. I think we all do.
because yeah, but again, like you said, and this is something else we're gonna go into too in another topic, but I've talked about this is like your anger is
Mhm.
sadness. Is sadness that's been ignored for so long, it turned to anger. It's not that you're an angry person. You're a sad person who's just never been listened to, who's never had a safe space to cry, who's never had somebody listen to how they feel, and who's never had a moment to be vulnerable with another and to create a trusting space to release. So your sadness turns to anger, and your anger protects you. So, yeah, when my inner child feels threatened, I'm angry
Yep.
because my anger's job is to protect me.
For
That
sure.
your anger is your walls that you've built up around yourself.
Absolutely.
And
But
the minute that you can recognize, like I did in that moment of like, damn, I'm not even really mad about this. I feel like I'm doing a lot by myself. And that hurts me. That doesn't piss me off. It hurts my feelings that I have a partner who I felt like wasn't helping me. Wow. It's not anger.
for sure. And let's take that a step further because then from anger, you have resentment.
Ooh,
And then if you can't release that, right? I feel like if we really want to structure this out, we can say sadness as a child, right? Causes you to be angry
mhm.
as you get older,
As you become an adult, yep.
right? You become an adult, you have that anger, but then it actually morphs into resentment. And that is something that if you can't let go of that, what does that do?
Have you ever heard of is it the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse?
Yes.
And that's okay, so then I'm not gonna say anymore. Listeners, y'all are gonna have to wait for when we decide to have an episode on
I
relationships.
think I know where you're going with that.
But that is yes, that's one of the 4 horsemen.
Mhm.
So shocking, but not shocking. And so but getting back to trauma, I love how, like, your generational trauma is not necessarily generational for you in the sense of your family, like your parents or your grandparents. Like your trauma is more like I've experienced certain things and what do I want to make sure my children don't experience?
Definitely.
So it's interesting coming from yours. I'm coming from like my generational trauma is all behind me. So like I'm just know I'm trying to break those things to help my daughters now. And it's fascinating. Yeah, just to have like the different perspective. Anything else like that you feel like you've experienced through your life that really
That I feel like I would want to potentially avoid.
right, that, like, affects you, that you feel like maybe was traumatizing that you would wanna make sure the kids don't have to deal with or try your best anyway.
Again, not to get too much into details with this, because we have a future episode about this, but racism is actually a big part of being and I would say Mexican American at this point, right? Like I've had
Mhm.
my citizenship 4 years. I still consider myself Mexican, by the way.
Yeah.
I am naturalized, but yeah, just experiencing just different circumstances growing up with law enforcement and just people out and about in the work field and at stores, especially with like our
Mm.
previous president. Um,
With our now current, unfortunately,
Soon to be,
current
yeah, and
president.
I'm sorry for those of you, again,
Yeah, not
freedom of
political.
speech. We're not political. Everyone has their own opinions, and I think that's the beautiful thing about this country. But yeah, for me to have experienced, not necessarily my parents didn't get a chance to actually live that. Growing up, having broken English and stuff like that is something that I did experience. There's a lot of racism stuff, and I don't want my kids to live through that. So I, you know, have to figure out how we're gonna cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, future episode for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Oh God. Does that mean it's my turn to talk about my trauma? My
Yes, it is your turn.
Oh God. Buckle the fuck up. Okay. So I mean, a lot about my family, but I don't know how much of the backstory you do know. And even if you did, to be fair, you were dating my sister.
Mhm.
So everything you might know is from her lens, not through mine.
Exactly. That's 50% of the story where it's 100% that you're missing, and that's not okay.
Okay, and so as I mentioned before, addiction obviously is both sides of my family. Alcohol is mainly my dad. I do have a touch on my mom's, but to be honest, my mom's side has more heavy drug use,
Mhm.
unfortunately. So I have addiction as one of my, umbrellas of trauma. I also have displacement as one of my traumas for multiple reasons. One, the biggest one is that my paternal grandmother, my father's mom, she's actually Ukrainian.
Mhm.
She was born in Germany. Her
Mhm.
family was displaced a few years after World War II, and they migrated to the US through Ellis Island when she was 2 years old.
Mm.
So they moved to Canada and then eventually they came down to Colorado. So having to flee from, a war torn country. And then, like I talked about before, particularly on my grandmother's side, that there is a lot of other types of abuse, domestic violence, sexual abuse, addiction, all of those things are very common in her side of the family. And my mom's as well has some displacement, more so in the sense of from Colorado. My grandparents are natives and they actually had property where the Metro campus is downtown, the Aurora campus.
Okay.
So it's called the displaced Agrarians. So people that had property there, it was taken through eminent domain by the state and to build the campus. Part of the agreement is that was initially that 3 generations would get free education on any of the campuses there. Um, and so again, they were kind of displaced and torn from their home there. And then it's interesting. I've always thought of alcoholism as my biggest, but I think domestic violence, now that I'm really thinking about it, is like my big family's probably biggest generational trauma. Because like as I told that story of like, a relative seeing grandparents,
Yeah.
those people would be like, as far as generationally, they would be on the same line as like my great great grandparents.
Wow.
So that's how far back we're talking about domestic violence. And then I mentioned it happened on both my father and mother's side. So when my parents got together, you can only imagine that it was not a healthy relationship. Not to mention they were teens.
Mhm.
Teen pregnancy is also a trauma, generationally, as far back as I know, 16, 15 has been
Mhm.
about the age to have children. So my two sisters and I are the first to kind of break that as well, being, adults over 18 having children. Um, and so again, this kind of combination, it's really unhealthy. And it's led to a lot of mental health disorders and undiagnosed things. And that's where the addiction comes in, right? Self-medicating
Yeah.
to deal with some of the mental health struggles. And so I'm saying all of this as a precursor because, I didn't have the best experience with my parents as far as I remember when I was with them. But that's to say, I know it's not their fault. Okay. They come from this lineage
Right.
of trauma. So again, I'm not saying that because I'm not happy about what I've experienced, but it's giving them grace that they did the best they could with what they had and
Absolutely.
with what they've experienced. Saying all that, my father was extremely abusive to my mother. Um, I mean, literally all of my siblings, our first words were cuss words
Mm.
because that's how he spoke to her. Very derogatory, very violent. And I mean, like my dad was controlling. He was the man of the house and that was it. And to the point of if we did anything wrong in the day, my mom was like, wait till your dad gets home. If she was that parent. And I know there's a lot of parents who have that like dynamic, and that's fine. Sometimes one parent is a heavier disciplinarian, and that's okay. But the dynamic with my dad, honestly, my dad was somebody who almost like got pleasure out of physical violence. And as an example, I remember one time I had to take a nap. My mom was laying us all down and I just couldn't fall asleep. I was little, like 3. And I remember she was like, "Oh, you're gonna be in trouble. Wait till your dad gets home." And I remember being afraid, but I don't know what I thought. I just remember the feeling of fear. But when my dad got home, he lined all of us up. Like I was the only one that didn't take a nap, but all 4 siblings had
Mhm.
to get a spanking. And now looking at it, you're like, why would you punish 3 other children for the behavior of 1?
Mhm.
But again, that's why I would say, like, I don't know, my dad, I really believe he just enjoyed being violent. And again, he grew up experiencing violence in
Right.
a very violent home himself. So not shocking, but another example that I have too, and this one really is like, I think where most of my trauma stems from, if I'm going to be honest, and it's already like, whoo, I'm already getting emotional even thinking about it. But I lived with my parents back and forth, I would say, between my grandparents and my parents until I was about 5.
Mm.
And when I was 5 is when my grandparents got full custody. But throughout the first 5 years of my life, I was shuttled back and forth. All my siblings were. Like, we would be with my grandparents for months, and then my parents would come pick us up, and we'd be with my parents for a few months, and then they'd drop us off and be gone for months. So that was very common. And, so there's obviously abandonment,
Mhm.
but even that from being younger, like, I remember living with my parents or staying with them at the time, and all 4 of my siblings and I shared a room. And my older siblings had a bunk bed, my older brother on the top, older sister on the bottom, and then me and my little brother shared a twin bed, like feet to feet.
Mhm.
And I remember this one night I had a nightmare and I woke up and it was one of those nightmares where you wake up and you still see everything
Mm.
happening around you. And so maybe I was still dreaming, but as my little kid mind remembers it, that like I could still see everything in my dream. And I was so, so scared. So I got up to run to my parents' room across the hall. And I remember getting to their doorway and pausing. And I just stood there for the longest time, staring into the darkness because my dad slept closest to the door. And to get to my mom, I would have to walk around him.
Mm.
And I was afraid to wake him up because my dad, like I just talked about, is not, he wasn't like, "Oh, you're scared? Come here, come in." No, my dad's like, "What the hell are you doing in
Mhm.
here? I have work tomorrow. Why are you waking me up?" Right? It's about him.
Yeah.
And it's interesting now that I'm thinking about it as an adult that like as a child, I knew that he would have that type of reaction, that I already understood selfishness,
Mhm.
and maybe without having that word, but that's what my dad was. He was selfish. He was like, it was about him. And so I eventually decided it wasn't worth it. I
Mhm.
weighed the pros and cons and like, is it worth it to get to my mom and what's going to happen? And eventually I just decided that shit wasn't worth it. And I turned my ass around and I went right back into my room and I snuggled up next to my little brother and tried to comfort myself. And through therapy, she's like, yeah, that little girl right there needed a lot,
Mhm.
right? She needed comfort. She needed love. She needed a safe space. And I didn't have that. I had to stand there. Sorry. And it's sad because I just think about my daughters, like my youngest is still very, she's the baby.
Mhm.
And even though she's going to be, she's 9, she's still my baby.
Yeah.
And she still comes to sleep with me to this day. And I could never think about my daughter standing at my doorway being afraid and being more afraid of her dad
For sure.
than of her nightmare. And that's who I was. I was more afraid of my parent, who should have been my protector and who should have kept me safe. So my trauma around men specifically and abandonment is
Mm.
very high. You see, there's never been men in my life that I can trust because from that young age at 3, 4 years old,
Couldn't
I
trust
learned
your
I had
dad.
to do it. I had to do this by myself. I couldn't depend on anybody to help me emotionally but me.
Mhm.
And I'm not gonna lie, to this day, I still struggle with that. It's still very hard for me to be vulnerable. I'm the strong one that other people lean on, but it's hard for me to give back. And as much as I'm like, hey, let's have this episode on vulnerability, that's actually still been one of my toughest things because I'm just so used to it. The little
Yeah.
girl just never could cry,
Mhm.
right? And so it's a journey and there's a lot of healing that she needs. And I know that about her. Um, but but I'm also very proud of myself from how far I've come from that because the interesting thing that I've noticed is I've been able to give a lot of grace to people outside of me.
Mhm.
I've been able to give a lot of forgiveness to my parents for those experiences, to my grandmother for the alcoholic environment that I grew
Yeah.
up in, right? And I'm working on giving it to myself. I think that's like my final stage.
Yeah.
But again, that little girl has been so let down over time that it creates this interesting dynamic in you. And it almost makes you second guess yourself.
For sure.
So yeah, that's my self-work right now really is that is like learning how to give myself grace and forgiveness, learning how to give that little girl the love that she needed that she didn't get from her parents,
Yeah.
and telling myself that it wasn't my fault that I didn't get that, right? Again, and it wasn't my parents' fault, okay? My dad never had that growing up. So, and not to villainize him, like, he had a very traumatic life, God rest his soul. He's passed a few years ago. Um, his addiction finally took him,
Mm.
and it's just something that it's a sad memory that I have of my childhood, but and with my dad, I made peace with him. Before he passed, I was lucky enough to have a moment to have that.
Okay.
Um,
I was just about to ask you actually because that's an important aspect of everything, right? And not to
no,
cut you
go
off,
ahead.
beat, but I think just in thinking through some things, that is an important aspect of being able to heal, right? At the end of the day, forgiveness and forgiving somebody isn't for the person that you're going to forgive. It's for you. Yes, you forgive the person, but you can't truly move forward if you don't forgive to be able to move forward for yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the other part. I can't go around being angry
Mm-mm.
because if I'm carrying the anger from the little girl in me, like I said, like the anger is controlling
Yeah.
me. I'm allowing that to dictate any growth that I could potentially go through
Right.
because I'm stuck here. The anger, I'm just allowing that to keep me stagnant.
Yep.
And I'm really into true crime.
Mhm.
And, people like murderers or whatever, and people, families like, oh, I forgive you. And I was like, how the hell do people ever forgive? I don't, and you don't even get apologies. How do you forgive without apologies? That never made sense. But like I said, my grandmother specifically, when I stopped and thought back to her entire life of what I knew of it, I was like, damn, I would have an addiction too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I can't judge you for choosing that as your coping mechanism when I don't know what I would have done in those positions, right?
Exactly.
So, literally putting myself in her shoes in the sense of thinking, like, could I have dealt with that how she did? Would I even still be here? And then thinking, like, dang, my grandmother, yeah, she was an alcoholic. She worked every day. She got her ass up at 4:30 in the morning, rain, shine, or snow,
Yep.
and got her ass to work and made her money
Yep.
and supported not just her 4 kids that she had, but then me and my 4
Yep.
siblings. She raised 2 generations of children.
Yep.
She didn't have to do that. And she struggled doing it clearly,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean? But like she deserves all the flowers.
All the flowers. And you know the biggest thing that I remember just from, previous experiences, obviously like I said, dated your sister and even then just hang out with you guys. Never going to forget this. I'm tired. That was the one thing that she would always say. And, obviously as you're growing up, you're like, well, shoot, what could you possibly be tired of? But To your point,
Or
the
you're like,
more
get some sleep.
yeah, but she and I have actually, had the privilege to have some conversations where she shared some of these things, obviously not in great detail, but I appreciate that because I feel like if you have conversations with people, then you get to understand where they're coming from, and now you're not just making assumptions of things.
Right.
And I understood her as I got older, and I was like, "Holy cow, like, this woman's been through so much." To your point, I don't blame her for doing a lot of this stuff. Because what would I have done in this situation? I mean, dang, dude, like, that's tough,
Yeah.
you know?
And that ability to look at your people, anybody around you that's struggling with anything, or even, like I said, your parents. And that's, again, we talked about at the beginning, it's not to make an excuse for them, but you're understanding they did the best they could.
Yes.
And when I say that, the reason I say that, for those of you who don't know this, psychology, everything we understand about the brain and psychology, okay, behaviors, relationships, traumas, all of these things, we've only learned in the past 25-ish years.
Yep.
That literally means my grandparents couldn't do anything about it if they wanted
Nope.
to. There was no therapy. There was no resources available to help you get healthy. So, to your point, all the trauma that she experienced and everybody around in those environments, this is a cultural thing. When we talk about addiction, right? This is cultural, that there's trauma and that people become addicted because of trauma.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's something that I think we have to really take time to be mindful about, is like, again, if it's your trauma, it's your generational trauma, these people are part of your family. They're
Yes.
also experiencing the exact same struggles, and they just didn't have the resources to help them understand how to get healthy. And so that's the biggest thing that we have to also keep in mind when we're talking about giving forgiveness to people. That's how you can forgive people, okay? Is recognizing that they themselves experienced their own shit,
Mhm.
just like we all do. And they did the best they could with whatever was in front of them without the resources that we have. So now that we have these resources available to our generation, it's our job to start going back and healing that, you
Yeah.
know? Like, I wanna go back and it's like hugging my grandma's little self, her little child that didn't get what she needed, that caused her to become an alcoholic and turn to substance instead of turning to healing,
Yeah.
right? And so, I mean, shit, sorry, that was really heavy. That's all just my family trauma, okay? That doesn't include my cancer shit and, like, my own
Yeah.
personal life. Jeez, my life is rough. Whatever, I make it. Here I am.
At at the end of the day, yeah, your life has been rough, but it's made you who you are today, right? And that's admirable. But to your point, right? We have to give people grace. We have to have these conversations, and we have to forgive people. And like you said, understand that we've all been through stuff. And as soon as we can do that, I think a lot of things will definitely change within different dynamics of any possible relationship that you're going to have. Right. Um, I mean, damn, that's all I can say.
I mean, I think it's really about understanding, like, what happens to us does shape who we are as adults. And people think, like, what does my childhood have to do with who I am now? That was then, this is now. No, you learned how to deal with your life, your emotions with people from your experiences growing up.
Yep.
And yeah, we didn't have the great examples. Maybe we didn't have examples at all. And so it's about realizing that how we do things sometimes isn't the only way,
Mhm.
and being willing to say, I'm not happy with myself in this particular area and in this way. How can I change that?
Yep.
And like we talked about, it starts with being curious.
Yep.
Just be curious about yourself. Wonder why you do what you do, why you think the way you think, how you handle your emotion. It starts with curiosity, and grace.
Introspection for sure. Right.
Yeah.
That is something that, with everything that I've gone through for this past year, which, holy cow, I just realized that that's possibly going to be another trauma that I'll have to break, right?
I
Is a
bet.
divorce.
Yeah, now you have like a relationship trauma.
Yeah, I have a relationship trauma now.
Hmm.
So, you know, making sure that my kids don't necessarily have to go through that. And that's not going to be something I'm going to be able to control, but making sure that having a conversation
Yeah,
about it.
you can't control it, but your experience
Yeah.
one day will lead to wisdom to share with them,
Yeah.
right? And the healing that you're going to go through and whatever insight you'll gain, that 2020 perspective that you'll gain from being distant from it, in another year or so, and or even like you said, by the time the kids get to that point, who
Whatever long it
knows?
takes.
Yeah, it will be a lesson,
Hmm.
and you'll have something to give them.
Yeah.
And like you said, hopefully that advice or whatever you have learned will help make sure that they don't experience something similar.
Yeah.
And that's all you can really hope for,
That's
right?
it.
Is trying to just continuously do the self work and understand that, like, shit, I ain't where I want to be, but thank God I ain't where I used to be.
Facts.
So, yeah, whew, kind of a heavy ass episode.
It was a heavy episode. And, I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, holy cow, B was sitting there doing a lot of talking. And we talked about this, um, I am just fortunate to have been able to be a part of your journey here today and just listening to everything and, helping you just think through some things and provide some of my insight and stuff like that. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you because I mean, generational trauma for me, like I said, it's something because I have so many umbrellas in my particular lineage. It's a lot of work. I mean, damn, I damn near had to become a whole different person. You know what I mean? Healing myself.
Yeah.
And so to your point, yeah, I definitely have a lot of stories and a lot to say about this, but it's just my unfortunate familial history. But if I can get to this point where I have emotional awareness and control over my emotions, I have that introspection, and I also have the ability to give other people around me grace through introspection, you know, it's possible for anybody. And I think that's the biggest thing I want to say is like, as crazy as all of that shit that I just explained about my traumas, it's important that people recognize like you're not where you start.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? It's up to us to kind of take the time to do the work. And it's so worth it. It's so worth it because I used to hate how I reacted to my own children. Just, we talked about spilled milk. I was
Hmm.
that mom that yelled at my kid over spilled milk. It's shameful and embarrassing in a sense, but I also want to give her grace because
Wasn't
she
your
was
fault.
struggling. Yeah, she didn't know. But, but my oldest does have memories of when I was a more tough, aggressive type of a mother because I wasn't healed.
Yeah,
And that's the last thing I want to say about this is, hurt people hurt people.
for sure.
So that's something to also recognize. I would say talking about the introspection to give others is even if you're going through your healing journey and you're starting, other people around you are not going to be there.
Hmm.
A lot of people in your life might not be ready. So you're going to still have people who are extremely
Yep.
toxic, who are still, that little child in them is still super hurt at the world and they're
Yep.
taking it out on the world.
Yep.
And so I would just caution people to recognize that and keep that in mind when people are nasty with you. When people say it's not about you, that's what they mean. That's why they say it, because someone else has experienced something in their life, in their day or whatever that's caused that. And they're just taking it out on you, right? Don't let that define how you feel about yourself, how you move through the world, how you continue to grow for yourself and learn who you are, because I think that's the biggest thing I've discovered is like I'm actually learning me. I was like in that poem in the intro, I really was a ball of insecurity wrapped in anxiety.
Mm.
I identified as all of those things because I struggled. And now that I've kind of cleared away a lot of that and I understand it, I'm like, no, we're good.
Yeah.
We're good. I'm going to be good. Everybody's in that boat. No matter where we are, we all have a chance to heal ourselves and to work on ourselves. And so that's the most important thing, I think, when it comes to generational trauma. You can't change your DNA that the trauma affected, All you can do is work on healing yourself now. That way you're not passing that on down the line.
Control the controllables, right? Which the only controllable that you have is yourself. Can't control the world, right? But to work on your inner child,
Heal your inner
heal
child.
your inner child, love your inner child. Um, and that's basically it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, this was a good one. This
Was.
was a heavy topic. It
It
was good,
was.
but I loved it. Thank you all for listening. Same as we always have told you guys, please, please make sure to take some time today to
Yeah,
do some self-care because this one was heavy. And we know that everybody is gonna need it.
absolutely. All right, guys. Good news. Our webpage is up and running. You can go to nsmbpod.com. There you'll find all our social media pages. We would appreciate it if you would like, share, and follow. You'll also be able to find our latest episodes, show us some support, and so much more.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We will see you in another 2 weeks with our next episode.
Have a great rest of your day, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.